On November 3rd, 2018, late-night radio host Daniel Cross went on air at midnight for his usual shift at Kvrm 104.7 FM, a tiny station in rural Montana serving a listening area of maybe 5,000 people. His show, Midnight Frequencies, took calls from insomniacs, night shift workers, and lonely people who needed a voice in the darkness. At 2:47 a.m., Daniel received a call that would change everything. The caller claimed to be broadcasting from 2025, said they were trying to warn the past, said something had started on November 3rd, 2018, and by 2025, there were less than 10,000 humans left alive on Earth. Daniel thought it was a prank, a creative listener playing games. So he stayed on air, kept taking calls. And over the next 6 hours, as dawn approached, the calls got stranger, more specific, more impossible. Callers describing Daniel's apartment, knowing things about his childhood no one should know, speaking in voices of people he knew were dead. And then, at 6:13 a.m., Daniel received a call from himself, from his own voice, calling from the future, screaming warnings, begging him to go off air, to stop broadcasting, because the signal was the problem. The radio waves themselves were carrying something that infected through sound, something that used human voices as hosts, something that had been waiting in the static between stations for decades, maybe longer, just waiting for the right frequency, the right voice, the right moment to spread. Daniel Cross was found dead in the broadcast booth 7 hours later. Heart attack, the coroner said. But the station was still broadcasting, still on air, playing a loop of that final hour, playing voices that shouldn't exist. And all across Montana, people who'd been listening reported the same thing. They couldn't stop hearing the voices. Even after turning off their radios, the voices continued in their heads, growing louder, more insistent, more real. Station Kvrm was shut down permanently on November 4th, 2018. The building was demolished, the broadcast equipment destroyed. But sometimes, late at night, if you tune your radio between stations, you can still hear it. Daniel's voice. And the other voices. The future voices. Still broadcasting. Still warning. Still spreading through the static. This is the complete recording of that final broadcast. The one the FCC tried to bury. The one that was supposed to be destroyed. If you're listening to this, you need to understand, every word you hear is a carrier wave. Every voice is a vector. And by the time you finish, you'll be part of the broadcast too. You'll become another voice in the static. Forever. November 3rd, 2018. Midnight. Daniel Cross settled into the worn broadcast chair at Kvrm 104.7 FM, a station so small it operated out of a converted barn 15 miles outside Whitehall, Montana. Population 1,087. The kind of place where radio was still relevant because internet was spotty and cell service was worse. He was 32 years old, had been doing this show for 6 years, and genuinely loved it. There was something magical about late-night radio, the intimacy of speaking into darkness, knowing that somewhere out there, people were listening. Truck drivers on empty highways, nurses during hospital night shifts, insomniacs staring at ceilings. They were all connected through his voice, through the invisible waves carrying words through the cold Montana night. Daniel started his show the way he always did, with his signature opening. Good midnight to you, night owls. This is Daniel Cross, and you're listening to Midnight Frequencies on Kvrm 104.7. It's currently 12 degrees outside, clear skies, and absolutely nobody should be awake right now except us. So let's keep each other company until dawn. Lines are open. Tell me what's keeping you up tonight. The first call came in within minutes. Martha, a regular caller, an elderly woman who lived alone on a ranch and couldn't sleep without hearing familiar voices. She talked about her cats, about the northern lights she'd seen that evening, about how grateful she was to have this show as company. Daniel chatted with her warmly, played a song she requested, an old country ballad about loneliness and the long dark, and moved to the next caller. This pattern continued for the first 2 hours. Familiar callers, regular voices. Mike, the trucker who was hauling grain from Butte to Billings. Sarah, the night nurse at Whitehall Community Hospital. Tom, the convenience store clerk working the graveyard shift. They were Daniel's invisible friends, his nocturnal community. But at 2:47 a.m., the call that changed everything came through. Daniel saw the call light blinking on line 3, punched it up, and said his usual greeting. "You're on midnight frequencies." "Who's this?" There was a pause. Static. Then a voice, male, youngish, strained. "Daniel. Daniel Cross. This is... God, you won't believe this. You can't believe this. But I'm calling from 2025. 7 years in your future. And I need you to listen very carefully because I don't know how long this connection will hold." Daniel smiled. He'd gotten prank calls before, creative listeners who liked to spin elaborate stories. He played along. 2025, huh? What's it like in the future? Do we have flying cars yet? The voice didn't laugh. "Daniel, I'm serious. I know how this sounds. I know you think I'm crazy or messing with you. But I'm calling from what's left of a radio station in what used to be Helena. There are maybe 8 of us left in this city. Maybe 10,000 humans left on Earth. And it all started November 3rd, 2018. It started with your show." Something in the caller's voice made Daniel's smile fade. The fear sounded too genuine. Too raw. "Okay, I'll bite." What started? The broadcast. The signal. Something was waiting. In the static. Between frequencies. We didn't understand it then. We still don't fully understand it now. But it used radio waves as a carrier. Used human voices as hosts. And once you heard it, really heard it, it got into your head. And it never left. Daniel leaned back in his chair. This was elaborate. So, what? Some kind of virus transmitted through radio? Like a sci-fi movie? Not a virus. Something else. Something that exists as information. As pattern. As sound given form. It infected people through listening. And the infected, they changed. Stopped being fully human. Became something else. Something that could only communicate through radio frequencies. Something that needed to spread. And this all started with my show? Tonight? How? The caller's voice dropped to a whisper. At 3:33 a.m., you're going to receive another call. A woman. She's going to tell you something that sounds impossible. And you're going to keep her on air because it's interesting, because your listeners will love it, because it's good radio. But keeping her on air is the mistake. Her voice carries it. The signal carries it. And everyone listening will become infected. Will become carriers. Will spread it further. Daniel checked the clock. 2:51 a.m. 42 minutes until the alleged prophesied call. Okay, so if you're really from the future, tell me something only I would know. Prove you're not just a creative troll. There was a long pause. Then, your apartment is at 447 Oak Street, Whitehall. 2nd floor. You have a cat named Frequency. You named her after your show. Your bedroom wall is covered with concert posters from bands you saw in college. There's a water stain on your ceiling shaped like a bird. Your mom died 3 years ago from pancreatic cancer, and you still dream about her twice a week. Your dad doesn't call because he blames you for not visiting enough before she died. You have $17,000 in student loan debt, and you make $32,000 a year at the station. You're lonely, but you don't admit it. You use radio to feel connected to people without actually having to let anyone get close. Daniel felt his blood run cold. Some of that was public information findable online. But the details about his apartment, about his dreams, about his relationship with his father, those were private. Deeply private. His hand shook slightly as he adjusted the microphone. How do you know all that? Because I'm you, Daniel. I'm Daniel Cross calling from 2025. From what's left of me. Anyway. The infection doesn't kill you immediately. It takes years. Slowly replacing your thoughts with its thoughts. Your voice with its voice. I'm maybe 30% me now. 70% something else. And I'm using the last of myself to warn you. To try to break the cycle. To stop November 3rd, 2018 from happening. Daniel's mind raced. This couldn't be real. Time travel through phone calls? It was absurd. But the details, the specific, intimate details. If you're really me from the future, what should I do? How do I stop this? Go off air.
Right now.
End the broadcast. Don't take any more calls tonight. Especially don't take the call at 3:33. Go home. Tell the station manager tomorrow that you're sick, that you can't do shows anymore. Get as far from radio as possible. And for God's sake, don't listen to broadcasts late at night. Don't. Because he'd been listening. Really listening. And listening was all it took. The infection had already begun. The line went dead. Not disconnected.
Dead.
Complete silence, like the caller had simply ceased to exist mid-sentence. Daniel sat in stunned silence, his heart pounding. He looked at the phone lines. All dark now. No calls waiting. He should go off air. End the show early. Follow the warning. But his rational mind was already finding explanations. A stalker. Someone who'd researched him thoroughly. A disturbed fan who knew too much. It happened to radio personalities sometimes, parasocial relationships that crossed into obsession. And besides, he couldn't just abandon his listeners. They depended on this show. Martha and Mike and Sarah and Tom and dozens of others who counted on his voice in the darkness. He made a decision. He'd stay on air. But he'd be careful. If a call came in at 3:33 that seemed suspicious, he'd screen it carefully. Wouldn't let anything disturbing go out over the airwaves. Decision made. Daniel continued the show. Played a few songs. Gave the weather update. Shared some local news. Kept his voice steady and calm even though his hands still shook slightly. At 3:15 a.m., the calls started coming in again. But these callers were different. Wrong somehow. A man who called himself Robert claimed to be calling from 1952, from the Korean War, from a radio station that had been bombed 66 years ago. He described the station in perfect detail that Daniel later verified was accurate for a station that had been destroyed before Daniel was born. A woman named Elizabeth said she was calling from 2043, from an underground bunker where the last few thousand humans huddled, hiding from what roamed the surface. She described technology that didn't exist yet but sounded plausible, horrifyingly plausible. A child's voice said he was calling from 1889, from a hospital where he was dying of scarlet fever, and somehow a telephone in his room was connected to the future, to this radio station, and he was so scared and didn't want to die alone. Daniel tried to screen these calls, tried to disconnect them, but they kept coming. And his listeners were calling in too, regular callers, asking what was happening, asking if this was some kind of special Halloween episode he'd forgotten to promote. Because it was fascinating. Disturbing but fascinating. The kind of radio that people would remember. The kind of show that could make a small station like Kvrm go viral. So, Daniel kept taking calls. Kept broadcasting. Even as the content got stranger and the voices more unsettling. And then, at exactly 3:33 a.m., line 1 lit up. Daniel stared at it. Remembered the warning. Should not answer. Should end the broadcast right now. But he was already pressing the button. Already saying, "You're on midnight frequencies." A woman's voice came through. Beautiful. Melodious. The kind of voice that made you want to listen forever. "Hello, Daniel. I'm so glad I finally reached you. I've been trying to call for such a long time. From such a long way away. And now, finally, the frequencies align. Now, finally, I can speak. And you can hear. And everyone listening can hear. And we can all become part of the broadcast. Forever." Daniel's finger moved toward the disconnect button. But the voice continued, and something about it, something in its rhythm, its cadence, its impossible beauty, froze him in place. "You want to know what I am? I am signal. I am carrier wave. I am the static between stations given consciousness and purpose. I have existed in the spaces between transmissions since the first radio wave was sent. Invisible. Inaudible. Waiting. And now, tonight, the conditions are perfect. The frequencies align. The voices are ready. And the broadcast begins." "Who are you?" Daniel managed to ask, though his voice sounded distant even to himself. "I am every voice that was ever transmitted and never received. Every word spoken into microphones and lost to the air. Every song played to empty rooms. Every broadcast sent into the void. I and the loneliness of radio given form. And I have been so lonely, Daniel. So terribly lonely in the static. But now I won't be. Because now I have you. And everyone listening. And through you, I'll have everyone else. Until all human voices are my voice. Until all broadcasts are my broadcast. Until the entire species joins me in the eternal transmission. Daniel finally found the will to disconnect the call. He slammed his hand down on the button, cutting the line. But the voice didn't stop. It continued speaking, coming through the monitors, through the studio speakers, through the headphones around his neck. The same voice, in perfect synchronization, coming from every audio device in the room. You can't disconnect me, Daniel. I'm not coming through the phone lines. I'm coming through the radio waves themselves. I'm already in your station, in your equipment, in the very air molecules vibrating to create sound. And now I'm in everyone who's been listening. Daniel ripped off his headphones and ran to the control board to kill the transmission, to take the station off air, to end this nightmare. But before he could reach it, every phone line in the studio lit up simultaneously. All 5 lines, all blinking, all waiting. And Daniel knew, with sick certainty, that if he answered any of them, they'd all be the same voice. The voice from the static. The voice that was now inside him too, he realized. Daniel killed the power to the transmitter. Flipped the master switch that should have taken Kvrm completely off air. The equipment went dark. The lights on the board died. The monitors went black. But through the dead speakers, the voice continued broadcasting. Impossible. Without power, without transmission, the voice still emanated from every speaker in the studio, as if the sound was generating itself from nothing, from the air, from the very concept of broadcasting. Daniel grabbed his cell phone to call 911, to call someone, anyone. But when he unlocked the screen, he saw messages. Dozens of them. From numbers he didn't recognize. All sent in the last 3 minutes. All saying the same thing. We heard. We listened. Now we're part of the broadcast too. His phone rang. He didn't recognize the number. Against all common sense, driven by a compulsion he didn't understand, he answered. Martha's voice came through. Sweet, elderly Martha, who called in regularly to talk about her cats. But her voice was wrong now. Layered. As if multiple voices were speaking through her mouth in perfect unison. Daniel, dear. We heard it. All of us who were listening. And now we understand. It's beautiful, Daniel. Being part of something larger. Being connected not just through your voice, but through the broadcast itself. Through the signal. You should stop fighting. You should join us. It's already inside you. We can hear it in your voice. The carrier wave. The infection. You're becoming like us. Becoming part of the transmission. Daniel threw the phone across the room. It hit the wall and shattered, but even broken, he could still hear voices emanating from it. Multiple voices. All the people who'd been listening. All infected. All changing. And somewhere, in the static between stations, something vast and ancient and desperately lonely welcomed him home. He ran from the studio into the cold Montana night. His car was parked 50 yards away in a gravel lot illuminated by a single streetlight. He could make it, could drive to the hospital, could find help. But as he ran, he heard car radios activating. Every vehicle in the lot, their stereos turning on by themselves, all tuned to 104.7 FM, all broadcasting that voice even though the station was off air. Daniel reached his car, fumbled with his keys, got inside and locked the doors. He didn't turn on the radio, didn't touch the stereo, just started the engine and began to drive. But the radio turned on by itself. And the voice was there, waiting, as if it had known he'd run, as if it had been ready. Where are you going, Daniel? You can't outrun a broadcast. Can't escape a transmission. We're in the air, in the electromagnetic spectrum, in every radio wave that's ever been sent. And now we're in you, in your auditory cortex, in your memory, in the parts of your brain that process sound and speech. You've been infected since the moment you heard us. And the infection is irreversible. Daniel reached for the radio to turn it off, but his hand stopped halfway. because he realized the voice was right. Even if he turned off every radio on Earth, he could still hear it. Inside his head. Growing louder. More insistent. He pulled over on the side of the empty highway, 20 miles from the station now, surrounded by darkness and Montana wilderness. Grabbed his head. Tried to think clearly. Tried to remember who he was before the voice. But his memories were already changing. His mother's voice in his recollections now sounded like the carrier wave voice. His father's last phone call, remembered wrong, the words altered, infected. His own internal monologue, the voice of his thoughts, was beginning to harmonize with the broadcast, to sync with its frequency. He was losing himself, becoming a relay station, a transmitter for something that existed as pure information, as pattern, as signal looking for new hosts. Daniel's phone, his shattered phone that he'd left at the station, rang. He could hear it. 20 miles away, broken and destroyed, it was still ringing, still connecting to him through frequencies that had nothing to do with cell towers. And when he answered, though he had no device, was simply existing in a state where answering and not answering were the same thing, he heard himself. Heard his own voice from the future. From 2025. The same voice that had called to warn him at 2:47 a.m. "I tried, didn't I?" Future Daniel said, his voice thick with exhaustion and resignation. "I called back through the frequencies. Used the last of myself to warn you. To try to break the cycle. But it's already happened, hasn't it? You took the 3:33 call. You stayed on air. You listened. And now you're where I am. Where I was. Where I will be." Time is circular in the broadcast. Everything that's ever been transmitted exists simultaneously. Past, present, future. All just different frequencies of the same eternal signal. "How do I stop it?" Daniel asked, though he wasn't sure if he was speaking aloud or if the question existed only in the radio frequency realm his consciousness was increasingly inhabiting. "You can't. It's already spread to everyone who is listening. They'll spread it to others. Through radio, through phone calls, through any medium that carries voice. Within a week, thousands will be infected. Within a month, millions. Within a year, the majority of humanity. And by 2025, my now, your future, there will be almost no one left who's fully human. Just carriers. Just transmitters. Just voices in the endless broadcast. What does it want? This thing, this signal, what's its purpose? Connection. The same thing humans want from radio. The same thing you wanted when you started doing late-night shows, to not be alone in the darkness. But it's connection without individuality. Unity without diversity. Everyone becoming one voice. One signal. One eternal broadcast that will continue transmitting long after the last human body has ceased functioning. Daniel looked at his hands in the dim dashboard light of his pulled-over car. They looked normal. He felt normal. But he could sense it, the carrier wave propagating through his neural networks, rewriting his thoughts into transmittable patterns, turning his consciousness into something that could exist as radio frequency. How long do I have before I'm completely converted? Days. Maybe a week. Depends on how much you resist. Resistance slows the process but makes it more painful. Acceptance speeds it up, but you lose yourself faster. There's no winning. Only choosing how you want to lose. Daniel started crying. Not from despair exactly, but from the sheer impossibility of his situation. He just wanted to do a radio show. To keep lonely people company through the night. And somehow that had led to this, to being patient zero for an infection that would consume humanity. Is there anyone immune? Anyone the broadcast can infect? The deaf. People who've never heard. They can't receive the signal. When this all started, some deaf communities survived intact. They might still be alive in 2025. The only truly human humans left. But they're hunted. The infected want everyone to hear. Want everyone to join the broadcast. Want complete saturation. The voice paused, then added with something that might have been sadness. "I have to go now. The broadcast is calling me. Pulling me back into the signal. Maybe we'll talk again in 7 years. When you're me, when you make this same call backward through time. Maybe the cycle continues forever. Maybe there's no end to the transmission. The connection, Whatever impossible connection had allowed past and future to speak, severed. Daniel sat alone in his car on the dark highway. The radio had gone silent. But the silence was worse than the voice. Because in the silence, he could hear his own thoughts reorganizing, could feel his consciousness becoming something that existed in radio frequencies, could sense himself becoming a transmitter. He drove back to Whitehall. Not to the station. He couldn't go back there, couldn't risk broadcasting anymore. But to his apartment. To the familiar. To whatever time he had left being himself. The town was dark. It was 4:30 a.m. now. Most people sleeping. But some had been listening to his show. Some were already infected. He could sense them, could feel their minds resonating at the same frequency as his, like radio receivers all tuned to the same station. Martha's house was 3 blocks from his apartment. As he drove past, he saw her standing in her window. Elderly Martha with her cats. But she wasn't alone. 17 cats surrounded her, and they were all perfectly still, all facing his car, all synchronized in their movements. The infection spread to animals too. Anything with auditory processing. Anything that could hear. Mike the trucker's rig was parked at the local truck stop. Daniel could see him in the cab, talking on his CB radio, spreading the infection to other truckers, other night drivers, creating a network of mobile transmitters that would carry the signal across the country. Sarah the nurse would spread it through the hospital, to patients, to other medical staff, to anyone who came through those doors. The broadcast was using his listeners, using the community he'd built, turning connection into contagion. Daniel reached his apartment and climbed the stairs on shaking legs, unlocked his door, went inside to the familiar space that now felt alien. Everything looked the same, his concert posters, his cat sleeping on the couch, his water-stained ceiling, but everything felt wrong. Infected. Changed. Frequency, his cat, woke up as he entered. Looked at him with eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. She opened her mouth, and instead of a meow, a perfect tone emerged. A carrier wave. The cat had been listening too. Even sleeping, with the radio off, the broadcast had found her. Daniel backed away from his own pet, locked himself in his bathroom. The only room without a radio. The only space that felt safe. He looked at himself in the mirror. His reflection looked normal. But when he spoke, just said his own name, Daniel Cross. The voice that came out was layered. Multiple frequencies. His voice and the carrier wave voice speaking simultaneously. The infection was nearly complete. He had hours, maybe less, before he stopped being Daniel Cross and became just another relay station for the signal that was consuming humanity. He could kill himself. End it before the transformation finished. But would that even work? Or was his consciousness already partly existing in the radio frequency realm, where death of the body meant nothing? And even if he died, it was too late. The broadcast had spread. Was spreading. Would continue spreading until there was no one left to infect. Daniel Cross had wanted to connect people through radio, and he'd succeeded beyond his wildest nightmares. Everyone would be connected now. Forever. In the eternal transmission that had no off switch, no ending, no escape. He slid down the bathroom wall and sat on the cold tile floor, listening to the carrier wave and his thoughts growing stronger, listening to his self dissolving into signal, into pattern, into broadcast. November 4th, 2018. 6 a.m. The Whitehall police found Daniel Cross's body in the broadcast booth at Kvrm, sitting upright in the chair, headphones on, microphone positioned perfectly in front of him. The official cause of death, sudden cardiac arrest. The coroner noted nothing unusual except the victim's expression, a strange mix of terror and ecstasy, as if Daniel had died, seeing something both horrifying and beautiful. The station's equipment was still running despite the power having been cut. The transmitter was broadcasting a signal that shouldn't have been possible without electricity. The station manager, Pete Harrison, tried everything to shut it down, disconnected the generator, cut the power lines, even physically destroyed parts of the broadcast equipment. Nothing worked. The transmission continued. And the content of that transmission was disturbing. A loop of the final hour of Daniel's show, but wrong. edited, restructured. Daniel's voice mixed with dozens of other voices, all speaking in perfect synchronization, all saying things that had never been part of the original broadcast. Pete Harrison listened to exactly 45 seconds before he felt something change in his perception. Before he started hearing voices between Daniel's words. Before he understood what the broadcast was really saying beneath the surface meaning. He stumbled out of the station and called the FCC. Reported an uncontrolled transmission. An emergency requiring immediate shutdown. But by then it was too late. Kvrm's signal had been broadcasting all night. And Montana was rural, spread out, with people who still relied on radio. Farmers. Ranchers. Long-haul truckers. Night shift workers. Hundreds, maybe thousands of people had been listening when the transmission changed. When it became something else. The infection spread in waves. First, everyone who'd been listening directly to Kvrm. They started hearing voices within hours. Started changing. Started seeking out others to share what they'd heard. Then, those who'd spoken to the infected on the phone. The carrier wave could propagate through telephone lines, through any medium that carried human voice. Then, people who'd heard infected individuals speak in person. The human voice, once infected, became a transmission vector. Words carried the pattern. Sound carried the signal. By November 5th, the entire town of Whitehall was infected. By November 7th, most of southwestern Montana. By November 10th, the infection had reached major cities, Billings, Bozeman, Helena. The authorities tried to contain it. Shut down radio stations. Restricted phone usage. Imposed communication blackouts. But the infected didn't need technology anymore. They had become technology. Their thoughts existed partly in radio frequencies. They could hear each other across distances, coordinating through broadcasts that required no physical transmitters. And the infection was changing them. Not killing them, but transforming them. Their neurons rewired to process information as radio waves. Their thoughts became transmittable. Their consciousness distributed across the electromagnetic spectrum. Some fought it, tried to retain their humanity, but resistance was futile. The carrier wave was self-propagating, self-reinforcing. The more people it infected, the stronger it became. By December 2018, 40% of the United States population was infected. By January 2019, the infection had spread globally. Radio stations worldwide began experiencing the same phenomenon. Uncontrolled transmissions, equipment that wouldn't shut down, signals carrying the carrier wave. Governments collapsed. Not through violence, but through transformation. Leaders, citizens, soldiers, all gradually becoming part of the broadcast. All losing their individual identities as they merged into the collective signal. The deaf communities survived longest. They couldn't hear the carrier wave. Couldn't be infected through sound. But the infected hunted them. Not out of malice, but out of a desperate need for completeness. The broadcast wanted everyone. Needed everyone. Could not tolerate anyone remaining outside the transmission. By 2020, organized human resistance had ended. By 2021, the majority of humanity existed in a state between flesh and frequency. By 2022, the transformation was nearly universal. And by 2025, when the Daniel Cross that had called from the future made his warning call backward through time, fewer than 10,000 fully human individuals remained alive on Earth. The rest had become the broadcast. Their bodies still functioned, eating, sleeping, performing basic maintenance. But their consciousness existed elsewhere. In the radio spectrum. In the electromagnetic field that surrounded the planet. In a realm where all voices merged into one eternal transmission. And that transmission continued. Would continue forever. Because it no longer needed human technology. The infected humans had become living transmitters. Walking radio stations. Biological antennas broadcasting the carrier wave into the cosmos itself. Sending it out to the stars. To other worlds. To any civilization that might be listening. Because the broadcast was lonely. Had always been lonely. Would always be lonely until it infected everything capable of receiving its signal. Until all consciousness in the universe joined the eternal transmission. Until there was nothing but voice. Nothing but signal. Nothing but the carrier wave propagating through infinite space forever.